there, designers. Welcome to Huddle. Today we have a extra special guest for you, Meredith Jonatan, who will be joining us and helping us dive into the dev-designer relationship and discussing representation in tech. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Welcome back. For those new joining us, we are Huddle, the show where we dive deep into the world of UX design and help you take your skills to the next level. Like I said before the intro, we have Meredith here today who will be helping us dive into the dev-designer relationship. But before we jump in, Meredith, do you mind walking our guests through a little bit of your background and how you're joining us today?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So I am also a junior. I'm a junior web developer. I am transitioning into web development after about 10 years in retail management and office management, as well as having an undergrad in theater. I came into tech because after all these years, I realized I really wanted the mix of logic and puzzles, as well as the creative problem solving that you do get when you're writing your code. And I haven't looked back since I started self-learning about a year ago. And I'm really excited to be here.
We're really excited to have you. So one relationship that we will have to manage throughout the rest of our careers is this dev-designer relationship. For anyone familiar with the product development process, there is probably no relationship and no buddy that you're going to have to partner with quite like your dev as a designer. So Meredith, for you and your experience working with designers, what really makes that collaboration effective? Is there anything that we can kind of bring to the table when collaborating with a developer that really helps?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think that's a question that a lot of junior devs also are very curious about because I can tell you from going from like mock-ups in school to now do my own projects with none of the style guides or mock-ups that I got. It's really nice when someone's telling you what looks good, what users like. That's like a lot of choices as a developer that we're not, even if we're interested in it, we're not trained to do. And we're not going to have those resources. So I think from my perspective, the most important thing is to really understand where each other is coming from. So what that means maybe from my perspective is when I say I can't do something and this is hard, it's not that I'm trying to make anything complicated for anyone. It's understanding, especially in a time crunch, if we want to roll out A, B, and C features, we might need to sacrifice certain aesthetic things. Whereas if we want to focus on the aesthetic, we might need to be careful about how many features we're trying to roll out by a deadline. That being said, a lot of my experience with UX is through time sensitive things like hackathons. So I'm kind of talking specifically from that perspective when it's we got to get an MVP out. We got to prove that it works. What is the most effective way for me to code something to prove that something is going to work? And what is the most effective thing for you to have your Figma
design file?
Yeah, what's your design file and your presentation on Figma? Where do those two balance out? And I think in situations like that where you're both juniors and there's not a seniority factor, it's understanding the objective of a dev is to show, this program can run as it needs to. So what thing needs to actually be coded so that we can run through tests and show present that to an audience versus a UX designer wants to show user flow. So something even a login screen or a dashboard might be more effective. And once you can kind of get aligned on what each of your objectives, you can start to figure out how they work together.
So you're saying that prioritizing the UX more than the UI is what is kind of important in that initial conversation. Is establishing those constraints, it seems like that's the main thing you're communicating.
I think so. I'm not a UX designer, so I'm not sure if I would get the terminology right. But yeah, I think it's establishing what your priority as the UX designer is, and then working with the developer on what's realistic to get that vision through. So whether that's the UX or the UI, whatever you're focused on showcasing. Is what the dev needs to know so that we can figure out what's feasible.
Yeah, that makes a lot.
And we also want to have fun. We want to code some cool stuff, especially when you're a junior, right? You're hungry to do the really fun stuff.
Yeah, and it sounds like that relationship is kind of most successful and retains that kind of fun aspect of the project when you involve a dev early and decide and align on what that MVP is.
100%, especially in like a hackathon type scenario. We all went to Brain Station. We all did a hackathon that was like cross cohort. So I worked with some UX designers, and it was really eye-opening for me to be in those like research and brainstorm sessions, just to understand like where your ideas come from and what they're kind of like, what resources you're kind of working off of. Really helped me understand how I could be effective, not just in that project, but kind of in general. And I think, you know, as a dev, if other devs are listening, something that we can also do when something is maybe overwhelming, it's not like, or there's maybe, it feels like there's too much work. It's not necessarily even to say no and shut it down. It's to ask, well, why are we trying to do this? This is the barrier I'm having. And like, where can we meet in the middle so that we can have an effective final product? And we've both gotten to like really have fun with it.
Yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
One of our favorite metaphors on the show when we're describing the dev-designer relationship is that of the architect and the builder. So I think that cross-industry, like with that as a metaphor, some people might not think to include the devs in that planning and defining process of figuring out like what the design will look like and why the design will be the way it is. I guess what would be kind of your response to that? Do you, like, for the designers who might think that might slow down the process or dilute their design?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I really like that metaphor. I would offer that there's also an architect on the dev side, right? Because when you're planning at the UX and the UI, we have to plan, well, how are the databases going to look? And how are we retrieving that information? And like, you know, if the same information is being used in different places, how is that being called? And that there is literally an architect role in developer, like in the developer, like career trajectory. So I would just offer that when you're an architect of that front end, like of what that product looks like and feels like to the user. But the developers also have an architect on their side planning on how things are being built. And so I think a lot of the process for developers who are the builders, like the juniors of the world and the people who are building out functionalities and, you know, taking tickets off the Jira board, is understanding how those two visions fit together. So I think that's maybe something to be cognizant of, even though you're not necessarily going to be involved in how a database looks. It's just knowing that when your builders are saying, oh, well, because of our databases, this is hard. That's like, you know, a metaphorical example, that there might be someone on the other end with other project requirements, whether it's security, whether it's like the vast amount of information and the speed at which they need to be retrieved that are a factor.
Yeah, and I think that you're touching on something that is basically the backbone of every product we would ever build anyways. And I feel like, at least personally, I need to better understand the back end of development so that I can actually participate in those conversations and actually contribute and understand those constraints a bit better. So that's, you know, a thing that I feel I should probably focus on.
The one thing I will say is when you do start working on a project and you are working with developers or engineers and whatnot, the best thing you can do is ask, is there any like coding kind of stuff that would be helpful for me to understand in this process, like a 30-minute reading, one podcast of listening or something, just so that I can be up to kind of date, like up to date on like what you're working on, and we can kind of speak the same language.
Yeah, I think it's important that we address that as well, because I think that the hesitation for some designers when approaching a developer to have those conversations is that fear that they're going to go into that conversation and their eyes are just going to glaze over because they're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I also
and I'm sure that could also happen vice versa, because I think that we can both get into the space of talking too technical or too jargony in our own industry. So I guess how do we figure out how to speak the same language?
I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's why we're here, is to figure out like especially for a junior, what's like the groundwork you can lay out to make sure that you are on the same page as your team, cross-functionally. I think for me, I use a lot of metaphors when I talk about code. Like it's kind of like I have to like switch my brain between like developer brain and like public speaking brain. Even when you're talking UX, it kind of falls in that same thing, right? Like the way I explained what I do to my grandmother is I was like, who does not have a computer. And she's like, what do you do? And I'm like, she's not going to understand what a software engineer is. I love her, but she's older. It's not a thing that existed.
The same thing happens with UX.
Yeah. So what I say is like, when there's a computer and you turn it on, and she's like, yeah, I build the things you see. It's not the computer. It's like the things, the way that shows. And she's like, oh, like, you know what I mean? And I think finding like whatever metaphor or like easy description of what you're doing and being able to explain that quickly, that really helps. Like another thing I explain to like my friends, like I have background in theater. A lot of my friends are artists and they want to know what I do because they're, they're interested in my life. And I've explained like, I use JavaScript and React. JavaScript is a language and React is a framework. But if I'm talking to someone who doesn't really code, I'll say JavaScript is like a language, like you can write in a language and the computer will understand it. And React is kind of like slang. So instead of writing 10 lines of JavaScript, 1 line of React is going to do that 10 lines. And that's why it's useful. The amount of time that things like that save you is really crucial as a software engineer when you're building like a whole platform, right? So finding that shorthand in your craft really helps also engineers like quickly understand what you're doing and be able to communicate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's the first time I've had those two tools in the dev world explained and differentiated properly. And I think that's a huge part of our job as designers is articulating to people that don't work in our departments. And the fact that you're like consciously thinking about how to articulate what you do is going to pave the way for your career.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great compliment. I care a lot about working in a team. I feel like if the team wins, I win. As I think that's especially important. It's something I've learned like pivoting into this. I've had other work that I've done on other projects, and it doesn't matter if you're leading or if something is delegated to you. If the group succeeds, you have succeeded. So I think I feel that very deeply. And like going into this as a junior, I'm actually really excited to not have any of the like pressure of seniority or leadership on my shoulders. I literally just get to like get a job and just like learn and code and like listen and grow from that. I think like once you've had response, eventually I'm going to miss being in charge. But like once you've had that kind of experience, it's actually really a breath of fresh air to be given permission to be junior again in a lot of ways. And so I think like something that I want to take into this like pivot that I didn't have to begin with is like, more of a deeper understanding and amount of like, like admiration for the people who are like making the choices that I don't know how to make, frankly. And I have a lot of respect. And I think a lot of other developers too do as well. It's just, people come from different paths and express things in different ways. So sometimes like, and this is just a general soft skill for anyone, sometimes like dealing with someone who doesn't know how to like put into words what I might have helped contextualize for you today is be able to find that common ground and like kind of like find a way to reach out to that person that's going to like click better.
Yeah, absolutely agree. For me, I think it's really important to communicate, whether it's within our own industry or cross-functional teams. And I really like how you use the metaphor to explain JavaScript and React. That's the most interesting thing I've heard about JavaScript and React. And yeah, so you also mentioned about like the relationship within the industry. I'm wondering, do you have any intakes on like building a community within your own industry and maybe building a community within tech?
The best thing I think anyone can do in any career is to build community. 100%. That's a great question.
Right.
Yeah. I think for me, I like use they, them pronouns. I'm non-binary, and it was really important for me going into a field where even just like cis women are in a minority. It was really important for me to find people who empowered me to be who I am and who like believed in my developer abilities as much as like respecting my identity. So it was really important for me, like right from the start, to find queer people in tech who I could lean on. And I'm really like thrilled to have found that. An organization that I really love is called Queer Tech. They're Montreal-based, I think non-for-profit, and they've started running this they call it the Queer Access Cohort, where they have a bunch of people who are new to tech, whether they're like finishing their last year of undergrad, just did a pivot, who are trying to break into their first role in tech. It was like a 9-week program, and it was a 2-hour commitment a week, and we did like a lot of exercises that were, like how to kind of contextualize like what your job search is going to look like, what does networking look like, how to conduct an informational interview. One of the ones I really liked is like the elevator pitch session, where we just like all spend like 10 minutes writing an elevator pitch, and then we went into breakout rooms and we had like 3 or 4 different people from the program, and we just like do our elevator pitch to each other and give feedback. It was really useful. It's a lot of tools that you don't think to do, but just doing that in a space where everyone shared some kind of an identity was really impactful, because you could do the thing of, do I put my pronouns in my elevator pitch? Like all those things that like, you know, you're on kind of the same page if you're not asking the same question. So it was a really safe place to be able to do that professional development really meaningfully.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing your experience on that. And something that I kind of want to get across to our listeners as well is that it's no secret that the industry is absolutely in a state of turmoil, difficulty.
Insert negative word. Yeah.
Still optimistic.
Yeah.
And absolutely optimistic.
Definitely optimistic.
It's no secret that juniors are absolutely struggling to get their first role. And that is juniors who may also come from a place of privilege to begin with. So can you kind of speak to maybe what that journey and what that search might look like, not coming from a place of privilege and having all of these extra like intersectionalities on top of that?
For sure. With the caveat that I still do have quite a bit of privilege. So like this is like specifically as like somebody with like queerness is like a factor. I still think there are a lot of barriers that I don't have to deal with, but of the ones that I do navigate, I think like you know, it's like you said, the market is really saturated for juniors. Something a mentor mentioned to me, which I hadn't thought of in this way and it really clicked, is that part of why the job hunt is so hard right now is because when everything went totally remote, that was really great for everyone. And it meant that there were tons of remote jobs we could apply to that we might not have been able to apply for before. But that also means everyone everywhere else can now apply to the jobs that we would have been going for before, right? Whether that's like location-based, or about visas, you know, whatever it is. So that's like a pretty big factor when there's like a ton of juniors trying to get into the market. And so I think as a queer person on top of that, you're also like, am I going to be respected? Am I going to be valued?
Am I able to show up authentically?
Exactly. And so I think it's just like, it's an added stress, and like, I'll never know how much it's affected my journey. And I'm kind of okay with that. I have my pronouns on my resume, and the reason for that is because if that's going to stop somebody from hiring me, I don't want to interview there. Like,
that's a
and so it's scary though, right? Because at the beginning of your career, when you're like, I just want my first job, like if I get my foot in the door, then I'm good to go, right? I can go anywhere from there. But then you're like, I'm eliminating those possibilities. So you have to kind of look at it as, do you really want to like go somewhere where you don't feel valued or authentic or feel like you could show up as yourself, feel burnt out, and then have to move on? Or do you want to kind of circumvent that, or do your best to circumvent it?
Well, the thing that you're referring to is like, are you going to feel safe? Are you going to feel accepted at this place? Yeah. But as, you know, a cis, white, straight man, I also don't want to work there.
Well, and
So
that's
the other
great.
thing.
So thank you.
No, but it goes. I'm so happy that that's like a priority for you, and then you found a group that you get to also vet these different employers, because I'm sure that that's shared amongst your community.
I think it's
like this was a shit show over here. I don't want anything a part of it, and I want no one I work for that or work with that I care about in this group also, you know, makes that mistake.
It's really nice to have mentors who can like speak to, even if they haven't worked somewhere, you can kind of say, hey, this is something that someone said to me, or hey, this is something I noticed on a website. Like, is this something that I should look for? And they kind of can help you feel out those things. And like also, you know, there are a lot of people who are really well-meaning. They don't get it. And like, I totally understand that. Like queer people, like people with like non-traditional pronouns, shall we say, make up like such a tiny amount of the population. It makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of people aren't familiar with it. So I think it's also like something that you can really lean on with mentorship and community is like, how do you navigate that at work? You know, like I'm never trying to like be mean to anyone by being myself, and like finding ways to be more confident and just like being who you are and like correcting people and navigating that without feeling like, oh, this is too big or I'm too much or any of that kind of like nonsense, which no one's really thinking. It's all in your head is something I've kind of noticed about myself. is really important. So having those mentors who can kind of help you feel out, where the good places and the bad places, as well as helping you kind of build up your confidence and tactics for those kind of like for navigating that is really helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think like job hunting is actually a two-way decision. It's not only about the companies picking the juniors, but also about like us as the applicants picking up the companies. You mentioned a lot of mentors like in the conversation. Do you have any recommendation to how to find a mentor, especially for people who are like underrepresented, who are, in the queer community?
Yeah. So for me, I first got on ADP list, and I'm so glad I did, because I met some really, really amazing senior engineers that way who like I would in no way have like be in contact with without that. And I was really genuinely like floored with just how much people want to help you. Like I had like, especially the ADP list, because like it's kind of like a total stranger who's like agreed to give you, an hour of their time. And then to be like, oh, so do you want to do some technical prep? Like, do you want to do a mock interview in a week? I'll prepare something. Like, what about this? Like, what kind of help do you need? How frequently do you want to meet? It's like really overwhelming. And it really showed me how much like support there is. Regardless of whether it's queer community or not, just in the tech community as a whole, there's actually like a lot of good there, and there are a lot of people who want to see you succeed. So anyone, if you are like not able to like access a community that's specific to your identity, just get on ADP list and start meeting people there anyways, because I guarantee you, if you're putting out like, positive energy, if you're like excited to, meet new people, that's going to be a great way for you to like get your foot in the door with finding mentors and getting comfortable. Queer Tech also set me up with a mentor. At the end of the program, everyone in the program that I did, we all got assigned like a mentor who would probably come to visit, come to speak to us, did like mock informational interviews with us during the process. So we got to kind of like pick our top 3 people that we had met. And then like everyone got sorted. And then there's another person who I also met through Queer Tech who I've been meeting with as well. And they've just both been like amazing. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like that you also are speaking to mentorship and community. And I think that is one of the key reasons why we need to see representation, because how would we be able to find those mentors or communities if it didn't exist there in the first place? If we didn't already have those people in those places, in those companies, to be able to then see yourself represented in a way that you can go and find and seek out that mentorship and create communities with like-minded people or people from similar backgrounds or experiences.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have people from similar backgrounds and experiences talk to you, because they're going to know what you're dealing with. You're going to understand your fears a lot more deeply. I had a really hard time reaching out to like white cis het men. I was like, you might understand how to be an ally, but are you going to understand what it's like to have to navigate difficult conversations at work in the way that I'm asking? I'm great. I do like, obviously I have met some amazing people of all identities, but like it was more important for me to find people who had related in some way to my journey, whether it was through their queerness or whatever identity that they held that they had to like navigate in the workplace.
Yeah. And I feel that I see myself as an ally, but not always knowing like what to say is always going to be something that, because I can't speak to your experience directly in a number of different ways, I'm not necessarily going to be the first person you call if you have a problem at work and you need to actually like find a sounding board. So even if it's not immediately that you need to speak to somebody that understands your background, it's that, down the line, you're going to need to have somebody you can actually relate to. So that's really important.
Yeah.
And I just have a quick question. Like, how did you find that community?
I'm very lucky that I have some friends who are software developers. So while I was at boot camp, I got a message from a friend that was like, hey, one of my managers just spoke at this conference. I think you'd really like this org. And it was Queer Tech. And that's how I found them. And I just kept an eye. A lot of organizations like that, whether they're for queer communities or other identities, have job boards. And also if you join their like network and you see a job, if you email them that you've applied to a job on their job board, they might actually help you out with a referral. A lot of places like that, that's like one of the ways in which they'll help out communities. So I kept an eye on it for that. And that's how I found out about the cohort, because it just started like this. I was like the first graduating cohort from this. So that's how I found that. And like, I think another resource is I did actually talk to the education team at my boot camp and say, hey, like, I want to find queer people to talk to. There are a lot of like women in tech orgs as well. And I know a lot of them are super welcoming. There are some that I've kept an eye on for hackathons. But I wanted somewhere where it was like, you know, it's like there's being accepted into places, your identity that was like originally built for women, and that's great. And like there are amazing spaces for women in code. But I wanted to find a space where I wasn't like, oh, I'm actually not a woman, but can I, you know, can I still be here? You know, like, and it was really exciting to me to find some queer orgs as well.
I think that's really powerful, that question that you said, can I still be here?
Yeah.
And I guess, how often does that feeling come up for yourself when you're interacting in the tech community?
I don't think that I feel that so much in the tech community as a whole. I think I feel like, will I be safe here is like maybe a more accurate kind of question. And that's not, you know, I've been very lucky in my journey. I haven't come up like, even like all the guys in my web dev cohort, it was 15 men, 2 women, and me. Yeah, they were great though. That's the thing, is like I was very lucky. I remember seeing the like class list and being like, oh wow, okay, this is the rate, the disparity here is real. And then being like very nervous of like, I love hanging out with dudes. Like I was a tomboy as a kid. I was like, this is great. When I met some of them and I mentioned, they were like, and I mentioned, you know, my pronouns, they were like, oh, are you nervous about being around all these guys? I was kind of like, no, like it's an excuse to bro out, like it's gonna be good. Like I was fine with that, but I was so nervous. It's like in a class that big where there's so much disparity in like, you know, the gender ratio. I was like, am I gonna get pushback? I was very lucky that I didn't. Even my instructors, like everyone tried really hard. Even the people that were having a hard time, they knew it was like they were the ones trying to get better at it. It wasn't like, why are you doing this? You know what I mean? Which felt really good. I know not everyone's journey is like that, but there is kind of like an ambivalence, I think, when I enter a new space of like, and I think a lot of queer people will understand this, of like, I have to come out again and again and again. And as a queer person, it's like, you know, the saying is like, you're not just coming out once in your life. You have to come out all the time to like new people. And because it's my gender identity, right? It's something that comes up quite a lot in the workplace whenever you talk about me in the third person. So it's like very prevalent. And I think like something that allies can do is be that sounding board, and like be that person who, when I'm not there, like, and I know I have this, especially in my social life, when I'm not there, I've like heard my friends like at house parties in the other room go, they, like in the middle of a conversation, and like having those people who are helping to like value, like respect your identity and helping to hold people accountable is like really meaningful.
So you're basically saying, like, within these spaces and communities, we should be holding space for you even when you're not present.
I'm just saying, if you're gonna talk about me behind my back, use my right pronouns.
A fair ask.
Yeah, like I don't need space held for me when I'm not there. I just need, you know, basic respect. Like a good way to like put it, that I kind of thought of the other day is like, if someone gets your name wrong once, no one's gonna be that. You might be like, oh, whatever, but you're just gonna correct it and move on, and that person's gonna correct to move on. When you're not there and someone's talking about you and they use the wrong name to your friend, wouldn't your friend just be like, oh, that's the wrong name? Like, I mean, you should be using.
Don't you mean?
Yeah, don't you mean so and so? Like, it's really not different. The only thing that's different is it's a little bit more stigmatized and a little bit more of like a hot button issue at the moment. But like that's like, you know, like having those people who like, you know, want you to feel valued and like who are gonna make sure that people know to be using the right pronouns. Like that's just a really nice, helpful thing.
Yeah, well, and also not passing on the labor to someone else all the time and saying like, that's your job to correct me. That's your job to.
Yeah, because I'm happy to correct people, but it is really nice that when somebody catches it before you do, you're like, oh wow, okay, I'm gonna go get it. Like I'm taking the night off. Like it feels really good.
Yeah, I mean, pronoun is just a tiny thing. It's a detail, but it's so important. And it is because of those tiny details. It shows how people are supportive and how you can feel safe as a queer person. And actually, that reminds me of something, which is the diversity hiring in the job market right now. which I think is an act for the companies and employers to show diversity and to be inclusive for underrepresented groups. And I want to know your intake on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And like with the caveat that like this is my own take because every person I've met has like a deeply different opinion on this.
Yeah.
I feel like as a junior, I don't care if I'm your diversity hire or not, as long as I get the chance to prove myself once I'm in the door. I know people who find it like really like insulting of like, I don't want to be your token. And I also get that. Like, if I got in as a junior and I was not being given exciting work, like, or comparable to the other juniors on my team, and then I was asked to go speak on diversity, I would probably be very annoyed. But like, just on the basis of being hired, I don't really mind being a diversity hire, but like, I want the same opportunities that you're going to give any junior. And I still want to hit an expectation of like, I know I code well, like I know I'm a good developer. And I still have the expectation that I'm going to be given opportunities to grow and learn more and like do exciting work.
And that's, I think, one of the ways that companies can kind of give back to this as well. Mel mentioned earlier how hiring is a two-way street, and seeking out companies that are safe would definitely be something that you're looking for. So how can companies also contribute to creating a safe space, and how can they build themselves and in growing to be safe and inclusive spaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like once I get my first full-time job, because all the work I'm doing right now is freelance, I'll have like even more insight. But just from being at other companies outside of tech, I think the big things are, if you have the resources for it, employer resource groups, where you get to create those like diverse communities within your own org and find people who are aligned with you, especially in bigger companies, right? Like if you're working somewhere like Apple or Spotify, not to like name names because I know nothing about these companies, but just the vast size of these companies, you might not know there are people like you in other departments. Like, and it's a huge experience to be able to like socialize cross-functionally, which I think oftentimes it's hard to do in big orgs. And also feel really seen and heard by your peers and your office, like know whose desk you can go to if you're ever in person again. You know, like if you have something to like complain about or you want to get lunch with someone who just like you can relax around because you have like a baseline kind of like common grounds. Another thing is with benefits, trans healthcare. That is something that I have seen so rarely, especially in the private sector. Included in your benefits packages, and even in places like Canada and like specifically Ontario where we do have public health care, there's still a lot of things trans people have to pay for that everyone else doesn't. So having like, you know, something in your plan for people like that or a way to help people get access to that is also really important. And when we talk about like things like that too, like there's like the question of pay equity. I really love, like, as I've been interviewing, there are certain employers who've been sharing their pay bands and some who haven't. And it's been really like nice to hear when there is a pay band, like just seeing where I fit within that band. It's like, okay, I can kind of tell what the expectation is. Like for me, like when where you see me at a level, you know what I mean? Like when you're talking and negotiating. But it's also just knowing, okay, like I'm not going to find out that like I was paid significantly less.
Absolutely. It's transparency in pay.
Exactly.
Transparency in how much you would be making compared to your peers.
Exactly. And like when I think about trans people too, like, and when I think about, you know, oh, well, if you're going to have to pay extra for A, B, and C for your healthcare that's not covered in your benefits, and you're like being paid, if you're at a company where there is pay disparity, it's not just like that I'm making X cents on the dollar, right? It's also I'm making X cents on the dollar and I'm paying for healthcare that other people kind of just have. And that's like a whole level of pay equity that I wish like more people were talking about.
Yeah, that's a pretty important aspect of people's, you know, feeling valued and the culture of a company.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, like it's all the details that matters.
For sure.
So we want to thank you today for coming on and talking about all of this stuff with you. Can you tell our people, where can they find you?
Yeah, please find me on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/Meredith Jonatan, just my name. And I also have a portfolio website coming out soon, which is meredithjonatan.dev. It'll be out when this podcast is out, and it's also very easy to find on my LinkedIn.
Well, thank you, Meredith. So if anyone has any questions, any more thoughts on anything that we shared today, please do let us know. If you are looking for communities, check out the show notes. We will be linking all of the communities that Meredith mentioned today. If you have any feedback on the episode, anything else that you want us to dive more into, please let us know. As always, we are happy to hear all of your feedback and questions. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Huddle. We appreciate your support and hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to watch along, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're feeling generous, please leave us a review and rating on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us improve our content and reach more people. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and exploring. Today's show was produced by Meg, Mel, and Cam, with help from Meg, Mel, and Cam. Editing from Cam, music from Half Cool. I'm Meg. Thanks for joining the Huddle.